So, all right, cool guys. Thanks so much for agreeing to come out here. So that everybody knows, we're hanging out here at the Minnesota Horse and Hunt Club. And we just finished, a couple hours worth of shooting.
Why are there horses? What's the horse thing?
Oh yeah, so they do have a kind of equestrian center here.
Yeah, it's actually on the road when you come in.
Really, the title is Horse Hunting Club. Yeah, you thought that burger was elk.
Oh, pop.
And hanging out here with Pete Carroll and Eric Barreto. People who, the two of you have pretty different relationships to guns, I think. Yeah, I think that's a pretty true statement. Pete, you're kind of, you've been a hunter for most of your life, I think, but your interest in guns has kind of taken a different turn over the past couple months.
Yes.
And Eric, you are not a gun owner, but you're not. You've been around guns before in the past, just a little bit. Yeah, a little bit of shotgun shooting here and there. So. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear the two of you reflect on just like how you understand your relationship to guns right now. Like, what do they symbolize to you? What do they mean to you? What kind of response do they generate inside of you? It can be totally informal. We're just having a conversation. They're eating, by the way. Just we're in the middle of one.
Who are you talking to? Who are you talking to?
It's my audience.
Oh, it's gonna be like that. Okay, so. Yeah. I think I start with a couple places. One is that my grandfather was a police officer and owned. After he was done with that, he bought a gas station. Bought several gas stations.
This is here in the U.S.
This is in Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico.
And it's a cash business. So he would always carry. I think it was a pistol or revolver, one of the two. Yeah. And I remember, especially as he got older. One of the gas stations was on this piece of property he had, and he built a house there. It was right there. So at night, when it was time to close, he would walk down. He's 50s, 60s, 70s, walk down with this revolver. And the older he got, the more worried I got. Not just because of...
The word you got?
Right.
Oh, okay.
I was always worried because they got robbed several times at gunpoint. It was just kind of part of the cost of business.
In Puerto Rico?
Yeah, and I think just because of the locations of these places are kind of isolated to dark. So there was that bit, like that. So that those guns were always around, but they were always like this kind of secret, right? Because we all knew they were there, but I never saw it out in the daylight. He never it was never a sport for him. It was utterly protection, and there's a few times where, so it was kind of out in the. Not in the city, it was kind of further out, and people would sometimes drive up to the house, and there's bars all over the house too. Like, it's just the way that the architecture is. But you always knew my grandfather had a gun, which was both like it made you both feel safer and not at the same time. Mostly because I didn't want him to get embroiled in something that, especially as he got older, that would get him injured or hurt or anything like that. So that's one piece of it.
Did he ever have any close encounters, I guess, that he told you about?
He got robbed.
Okay.
So I don't think at that point... I don't think he ever had to... That I know of. I should ask my mom. I don't know if he ever had to use the gun on somebody. I think if I remember right, he might have scared off some people with it.
Yeah. Just
with its presence. I don't know if he ever had to actually use it.
Yeah.
So...
So would you say that was your earliest memory?
Oh, yeah.
Other than maybe like television, I don't know.
I think growing up, that was kind of just, you just knew that about Abuelo. Like, he had, when it was time to close shop, he'd go down there, get the cash, and do that. So,
And Pete, how about for you? Like, as you think about your early childhood, what was the earliest memory of?
I'm trying to think. My earliest, I know my dad used to pheasant hunt with my uncle on occasion when I was really little. But then I didn't get really back into or involved in hunting until I was in my early 20s. So I don't know, 20 years ago probably. When we would deer hunt. And then I have a friend, close friend of mine, the best man at my wedding, has some property in southern Minnesota on a lake, and so we would duck hunt quite a bit until the kids got active, and then Anna got into soccer and stuff, and fall soccer got pretty busy. But, so it was really more, I mean, I've had shotguns for a while, but handguns were never, I mean, I had never really seen a handgun much.
All for hunting.
For hunting or for, yeah, I mean, it was all, my interaction with firearms was all hunting related until recently. And so, and it was, my dad never really had guns. When he was done pheasant hunting, I think he got rid of his guns. So, so my childhood was, I mean, pretty much without firearms.
Yeah. I mean, so that's interesting. The two of you have really different, in terms of your backgrounds, they're really different relationships to guns. I mean, Eric, your grandfather, owning them exclusively for protective purposes, not really sport involved. And then Pete, exclusively sport without any kind of sense that they're a form of protection.
I can't imagine. I don't know. I could be wrong about this, but I can't imagine that there's any hunting culture in Puerto Rico.
Okay, I was going to ask that actually.
I don't know what you would hunt, for one.
Yeah.
And two, it's an island and it's small. So it's not.
Right.
I don't know where you go to do some of that.
You couldn't.
I think some people that do shoot for sport, but not. Oh, and I think on top of that too, there is a certain amount of criminality. That's also then. So if there's guns in the news in Puerto Rico, it has to do with murders and shootings and violence and things like that. So I think it's a different culture down there. Even though it's still the United States, it's not quite the same thing as it is here.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Puerto Rico's gun laws.
I don't know either.
Yeah,
it's a good question.
There's some.
I think there's a lot of illegal guns, but I don't know what it looks like to have an illegal firearm.
Yeah. Huh. So how would you guys describe currently how you relate to guns? I mean, in terms of ownership patterns or non-ownership patterns, and then also just how you think about the role in modern society. Because I think the two of you also have very different views of that as well. Eric, by the way, is a professor of New Testament, who's written just a little bit on guns.
So I don't own a gun. I can't imagine that I would.
How are we doing over here, gentlemen?
Great, thank you. I think especially now living in the States and thinking about questions about race in particular, that
you're Puerto Rican, ethnically Puerto Rican.
That I think it's just not part of my kind of cultural milieu to think about firearms a lot. And when I do think about them, it's thinking about the ways in which they do harm rather than either people. So that's my predisposition. I don't think about sport. I don't think about hunting. It's not my cultural milieu. I think about the harm that they do, whether it's in domestic violence or in other kind of criminal activity, or when accidents happen. So I think that's when I think about guns. That's what my first thought. That's where it goes to. This has everything to do with my experience. So the piece I wrote wasn't right. So it was I had to go with a provocative title about fasting from guns for Lent.
Right, it was a Lenten piece.
Yeah, and it was less about gun violence, more about thinking about what our cultural attachment to forms of violence. What does that say about us? So it wasn't like a policy prescription, but more like wondering what this has to do with our faith. So like some of the work that you're doing in way more interesting ways, Michael. But so yeah, I think that's where I think politically, like I'm just a more left-leaning person. So that kind of comes along with it.
Yeah. So, but if I were to ask you the question, what do guns symbolize to you? Most of the words that you would respond to might be negative, or have to do with the threat or the
violence,
human life, violence.
Yeah, and harm and loss. Yeah.
How about you, Pete? Like if I were to ask that question, what do guns symbolize to you?
Well, it's interesting because I kind of came through where Eric was, or is. There's a long time I never saw myself owning a handgun because I was scared of handguns.
I'm scared of them.
For that same reason, because of what they represented, and it just seemed to be part of it was lack of knowledge. I hadn't been around them. I hadn't I hadn't shot handguns much, and but now that I've been introduced to the sporting aspect of it and spending time with the guys with in the 3-gun group and stuff.
Now you shoot competitively.
I shoot
so
competitively.
Those who run 3 guns, a competitive
Right.
shooting
Yep.
sport. You do a
Right.
little bit of, clay shooting as well.
Yeah,
Shotgun
and I
shooting
did.
as well.
I have been doing trap shooting for quite a while, but I've always separated shotguns kind of from every other kind of firearm
That's interesting.
Yeah,
in
that
my
is
mind.
interesting.
Because shotguns in my mind have always been sporting related or hunting related. So I never equated that with crime or any kind of violence. But I had handguns. But then so once I started shooting competitively, you start to meet the people and, if you want to call them quote unquote responsible firearms owners who take it very seriously and who take safety very seriously. It puts a whole nother kind of, it started to, my view started to change because you start to realize most of the gun owners out there take safety very seriously and are very seriously about owning their firearms and how they use them. And in the 3-gun competitions, how safety is the utmost focus. It's over the top, which is great. And so it's a great introduction, or it was a great introduction to me in that respect, to see that you can safely own a firearm or safely own firearms and actually enjoy using them. And I have, from a personal protection standpoint, that's really starting is kind of where I'm processing right now.
You're thinking about those issues.
Right. That's what I'm processing right now is at 46 years old, I've never been in a position in my life where I felt like I needed a firearm for personal protection.
Interesting. Okay.
So I've gone, and I grew up, middle class. So I've never really been in those situations. So for me, it's not, do I feel like I need it now for personal protection?
Like there's an immediate thing.
Right.
You don't feel
right.
like
But then when you start, obviously with the news and everything else that's going on, and you start to see, the violence that's out there, that's what kind of prompts me is, right, you may not know, the whole point of it is you probably won't know until you're in that position that it's like most people, like we talked about a little bit earlier, people don't go out, leave their house thinking they're going to be in a confrontative situation or a life or death situation. Most people just don't leave their house thinking that. So for me, it's still from a sporting aspect, which is immensely enjoyable for me, and it's a great hobby now. I look forward to when we go out shooting and stuff. But yeah, the personal protection piece is still something that and my wife,
it's kind of a dialogue.
It is a dialogue that we're having right now is to, do we need it? My wife took her the conceal and carry class with me, so she could, get her permit if she wanted a permit to carry, but she has no interest in doing that. And I went and got mine, so I have my permit to carry now. And so that's kind of the dialogue that's going on right now.
So it's interesting because I would say the two of you probably.
You guys
What's
doing
up?
all right?
Yeah, we're good. Good, thank you.
Where's the baby?
Yeah, I know. You're the second person to ask. She just didn't come out today. It was kind of a guy's day today.
You put up with him. You like the baby. You like
She
you do.
doesn't know you're here, is what you're saying.
Oh no, she knows.
Oh. We're good at all. Yeah. You guys doing it?
Water.
Yeah,
Cool,
absolutely.
thank you. Well, it's interesting because I imagine that the two of you listen to some of the same news sources. Pete, I've been in your car before. I've heard NPR on before. Eric, I know you listen to NPR, Minnesota Public Radio. So you listen to the same news sources. You know the same stories. These are both really informed people politically. But you actually come to different conclusions about how to respond to those threats or potential, or about the kind of the current environment. I wonder.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think. How do I say this? I think for me, one of the really interesting questions about firearms is the way that those discourses are racialized or not.
Yeah.
So we joked. Or Michael joked. Can I say this?
Yes.
We joked about coming here with very people of color, and like that would be so. It's
we were going to have an African American friend here.
Yep.
Eric is Puerto Rican. I'm Asian American.
Yeah.
Pete is white.
So like there's these gun cultures are often, not always, consistently,
it's dominated by white.
but often aligned or in opposition to guns. Often then is also racialized in a way, either as white liberal or. So I think that's really interesting, and I don't know exactly what to think about that. I do know that. Like I think my own predisposition is I can think of very few situations where adding guns to the mix make things better,
right.
And that I think is maybe unfair, or right? Maybe people can convince me otherwise, but that's just where I live. But again, I live in a city. I live in a neighborhood in a city.
I wouldn't disagree with you.
Yeah,
I wouldn't disagree with you,
okay.
Especially when you talk about. When you go through the conceal and carry class, which I've done recently, there are very, very, very few occasions where it's even appropriate to draw your weapon.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So I would agree with that. There are very, very, very few situations where having a firearm would benefit.
Yeah.
And brandishing your firearm would benefit. I think it's. I mean, if you go down those check boxes that they talk about. It's got to be literally life or death situation with no escape. And how often is that going to happen?
And there's a really interesting question there about whether do I trust or not people in general,
right?
To bear that kind of deadly responsibility.
Sure.
It's a society-wide question.
Yeah,
right.
More
this beyond just
and it's for me, it's also a theological question too.
Yeah,
right? Are people generally trustworthy, and that I think I'm caught between. A call I feel in my faith to trust people and to love people, and on the other side, the reality that I know people are deeply sinful, and I also know particularly in this country that we have dealt in unjust ways with one another. So how do you hold like both this faith that says embrace the other and trust them, and on the other side the historical realities? I don't know. So that's
a really nice way of framing it. Yeah, there's an anthropology issue there. I have these thoughts, and you come from a Protestant tradition, which has traditionally kind of lifted up the depravity of
totally.
humanity. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. Those are great.
And yet also this call to love the neighbor, which is also lifted up in the tradition as well, which on some level, I'm not done with that one yet. Thank you.
Sorry.
Which also requires a bit of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I spoke with another of our colleagues who works at Luther Seminary, and she said to me, on some level, this person is not on a gun, she said, on some level, I feel like I'm called to live in vulnerability toward the neighbor. And I hear a bit of that in what you're saying.
Yeah, like that. So,
and for you,
if I'm being less than generous, so right, we know that the sale of ammunition and guns has just gone through the roof in the last few years. If I'm not being generous, it's because I think people are unnecessarily scaring themselves, right? If I'm going to be really unfair, maybe it's more complicated than that, but that's, I think, when I'm most tired, that's what I think.
You're most tired.
And to me, I think one of the prescriptions, is that the right word? I don't know. One of the things that the gospel calls us to is to not live in fear. So can gun ownership and that call to flee fear, how do those two things hold together? So if right, and I don't know how to answer that, right? Because so it's not I'm not sure how to declare it.
Well, how do you respond to it, Pete? As someone who's kind of really on,
because you're thinking about it.
Thinking about it. It is, and I guess I don't know. I guess maybe I have a little bit more trust there. If my neighbor had a gun, I wouldn't have a problem with it, and I wouldn't look at my neighbor having a gun as a potential issue. I would look at it as a potential good thing.
Interesting.
To say,
See, I'm thinking more abstract. I'm not thinking my neighbor. I'm thinking just random person X. But stand behind me. I'm glad he has a gun.
Having gone through the process to get my permit and to get my and to purchase a firearm, I think the people who are willing to go through the process to legally obtain a firearm, I I think are people who are honest, law-abiding, upstanding citizens. And I partly because I look at myself that way, and I've done it, and I hope that everybody else does. And so part of it might be a little bit of naivety in that respect too, to say, I think,
maybe
I did it. So, and I followed the steps, and I'm a responsible gun owner, and I know other responsible gun owners. Can I generalize to that large of that everybody is? I probably can't.
Both of you have made abstraction moves, in fact, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
So like, I don't worry about you owning guns. I don't worry about Pete owning guns, or my back neighbor Stan, who I don't know has guns, but I assume he has guns. But the abstract person that I don't know, I worry about that. I hadn't realized it just now.
What was that?
I hadn't realized that till just now.
Oh, that's interesting. Who is that neighbor?
Yeah.
The racialized piece is really interesting. I remember when I was doing that Minnesota Public Radio thing. A biracial woman called in. I think her mother was black, her father was white. Could have been the other way around. And she said it's so different to have a conversation with them individually about guns, because you think about. Well, we were talking about Richard earlier, our African American friend, like to talk for society to put up images of a black man with a gun evokes for some people a different kind of response than if you were to put on the screen a white person with a gun. And that points, I think, to a deeper conflict within Americans.
I think you're and looking at it, Carrie and I have talked about this, and looking at it from the reverse is that we've talked about. I don't know if we'll edit this, but we talked about Richard and why Richard was interested in coming shooting, and Richard's interest in firearms is because Richard finds himself in situations much more frequently where he feels like his safety is at risk.
Interesting.
Much more than me, right? I mean, obviously much more than me. So if you look at it through a different lens and you put a firearm in the hand of an African American or a minority, you can look at it through that lens where they feel like they need it because society
doesn't trust them.
It doesn't trust them.
It doesn't sees trust them as threats.
Right. Well, even without the firearm.
Right.
So they need it because they don't
to compensate
feel
for that.
Right.
Which then kind of reinforces it. Right. For some people, reinforces that they're not trustworthy.
Now you've got a spiral, right? Now you've got that. Yeah. So, So I mean, cause, and obviously we all grew up with looking through different lenses, and so like I said. I mean, I'm sure Richard has found himself in many a situation where he felt like he'd felt safer with a firearm, and I never have needed that. So
wow, that's interesting. So I heard Eric talk a bit about the faith component. How do you see that working?
It's interesting because I thought about that after you sent out the email, kind of.
Right, the direction.
Maybe we talk about this, and for me, it's more. I look at my faith as kind of controlling how I act as a human being and how I treat people as a human being, and so my ownership of firearms just kind of fits into that. It's kind of a responsibility that I have to be a good person and to be a responsible person to not only as a firearm owner, but as a person in general, and as a boss, and as a parent, and so
this larger world of responsibility.
That's the category.
Because I don't have this thing that says it's my God-given right to own a firearm, because it's not. It's the Second Amendment right. It's a human-given right for me to own a firearm, but
you wouldn't tie that to God.
Right, I wouldn't tie that to God at all. I don't think, and quite frankly, I don't know that God really cares that I own a firearm, right? I think God wants me to be a good human being and has put me here to role model for my children and to be a responsible person. But I don't think God's looking at me as you should have a gun and you should be responsible. I don't think He's looking at that level in my mind. Right? So I look at it as more of just kind of an overall.
What do you? This is really.
That category.
Sorry, I want to ask you a question.
No, you do. No, it's good.
What do you mean? Because I think of different things when I think about responsibility. What like pops to mind when you think like what it means to be a responsible person.
I mean, I think you need to treat people with respect.
Yeah.
I think you need to be, honor your commitments.
Yeah.
I think, it's being there when you need to be there.
You mentioned fatherhood as well.
Right, well, absolutely. And for me, that's huge.
And work and
that kind of stuff. And I look at that as it should all carry through, right? If I make a commitment to my kids, I need to honor that commitment.
Yeah.
If I make a commitment to my staff, I need to honor that commitment. If I, and I think I need to be a role model.
Okay. You can split like 3 ways if that's all right. Okay. Is that possible? Okay.
And so I think,
I thought you were paying Shane. What the heck?
Is this part of the membership?
Oh yeah.
This is all free, guys.
This is my direct benefit.
Right, exactly.
Roll out the cake.
So that's kind of how I look at it is being, try to be a good human being, right? I mean, you can only be so good, I think. I mean, we all make bad decisions, poor choices at times, and that's going to happen. But overall, I hope people look to me as somebody who they can count on and who they respect, and who I respect them, and that kind of stuff. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah, that category of responsibility. It does often come up in these conversations when I'm talking with gun owners. They'll talk about their sense of responsibility. There was a recent book that was published called Citizen Protectors. And it was done by a sociologist who did actually kind of similar research to what I'm doing, but she got her permit to carry as a way of embedding herself in the culture. Yeah. And the way that she described other people who were also permit carriers was they are citizen protectors, and so they see themselves as having this role of responsibility within society, not only to protect themselves but also varying spheres of responsibility. So sometimes it would include family, sometimes it would include what they might call sheep. That's a common thing. You have this kind of three-part thing of the sheepdog, the sheep, and the wolves. And it's a way of thinking about people in the world and kind of typologizing.
I'm a sheep, probably.
You're sheep? I don't know. but when we think about that image, though, sheepdog, sheep, wolf, responsibility is built into that image. In the person of the sheepdog in particular, that person's job is to watch over the flock. Yeah. It's his responsibility. I often hear that come up as an important category.
Well, that's for me, that's always been how I've wanted to live my life. Yeah. And I think my faith is really what's shaped that. I mean, I grew up on church, so I've only been, really spending time for the last 20 years in church on my journey, and
the category of responsibility also. Well, when my partner and I were first, Dr. Katie Day and I were first working on categories or typologies for different kinds of gun owners, we had on one spectrum kind of radical individualism, or you might call libertarianism, and then communitarianism on the other end. And the knee-jerk reaction of many is to see gun owners as radically individualist.
That would be my assumption.
My protection.
That's right.
But when you start to think about the citizen protector model, you realize, wait a second, there is an element of communitarianism there, but it has a different kind of feeling than maybe.
That makes sense.
The more kind of. How best to say this, kind of progressive ways of thinking about guns. So they're both, I think, have very communitarian impulses, but they manifest themselves in different ways.
That's interesting,
Yeah. So it's challenging. Again, that's the helpful part about these kinds of conversations is that erodes some stereotypes.
Well, I totally agree. Well, and I have to admit, I mean, now that I've spent some time with gun owners and stuff, and I mean, it does erode some of that like I said, I think I tend to err on the side that the people who have legally gone through the process have made it a point to be responsible gun owners, and so maybe I'm giving them a little bit more benefit of the doubt.
Sure,
maybe
but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, it's certainly a complicated conversation. I appreciate you guys' willingness to talk about it.
Of course.
Any last comments you want to make?
Pew, pew, pew.
Pew, pew, pew. back to your video games.
Glug, glug,
Well, yeah. Cheers to that. Cheers. All right, thanks, guys.
What is the relationship between this and this? Or between this rifle and between this, the cross? For many Americans, guns and religion have nothing to do with one another. They are, to be sure, regular parts of our political discourse. We hear it on TV, we hear politicians talking about it all the time. But to see them together like this, as complementary realities, seems somehow out of place. How can faith have anything to do with firearms? But for a significant portion of the American population, these two things have everything to do with one another. The way of the faithful and the way of the gun are intersecting paths. This is the Faith in Firearms Project. My name is Dr. Michael Chan, and I want to welcome you to this vlog, which attempts to break open a conversation about the relationship between guns and religion. For the foreseeable future, I will be conducting face-to-face and digital interviews, visiting gun shows and gun events, participating in shooting sports, all in a quest to understand why so many Americans passionately link their religious commitments to their ownership of guns. This is such an important conversation at this moment in history, and especially in our current political environment, when caricature so often prevails over genuine conversation, and when straw man pushover arguments so often pass for legitimate political rhetoric. America needs to make progress in its centuries-long debate about the role of guns in American life. But this can't happen apart from genuine listening, apart from a willingness to look the neighbor in the face and say, "Tell me your story." And that's what this project is all about. It's about stories, not statistics. Stories add texture and nuance to quantitative data. They put a human face on the reams of numbers already available regarding gun ownership and gun violence. What would you call this project? Scholarship, journalism, ethnography, however you want to think about it, however you want to define this project. It's ultimately about stories. Your stories, my story, our nation's story. It's about culture, and it is especially about religion. Finally, this isn't just my project. It can be yours as well. I invite you to contact me and share your stories. Talk to me about where you've seen faith in firearms linked. Perhaps in your own life. Perhaps this is an important connection for you. Or perhaps you've seen it in the lives of others, in the lives of family, or in the lives of friends. Or perhaps you simply want to express an opinion on why you think so many Americans link faith in firearms to one another. Subscribe to this channel. Send me your stories at faithinfirearms007@gmail.com, and we'll explore together why so many Americans link faith and firearms. Thank you.